let's talk about books. These are the books I read in September, and let's get started. We can do like a group review after. It was a weird month for books. So let's start with Isola. This is by Allegra Goodman, and it's a historical fiction book that is set in the 1500s, which I said this when I reviewed Frozen River, but I always like reading historical fiction that's set in a time period that I have not read a lot in. And the plot is that there's a woman who is upper class, but because of reasons, she loses her right to her own castle and like land and stuff. And this is based on a real story. She ends up in a city instead of in the country with her ancestral seat. They have to like rent it out or something. And then in the city, her guardian is one of the people who is exploring the New World. And so she has to go on this journey on a ship across the Atlantic. And then, as you can maybe tell from the cover, she is marooned by the captain, well, by her guardian, with the guy that she's kind of had a thing with, who is not her guardian. And they get abandoned with like one trunk full of stuff and no other means for survival. So it is quite a tale. I didn't love it, but I was always fine to be reading it. I also felt like it was a pretty good balance of the pace it was well paced. So I wasn't super bored, and I liked the relationships that the main character had with the people back at her little country house seat. You will like this if you like historical fiction, and it was well written, and am I too sleepy to do this tonight? I'm not sure. Let's keep going and see if I am. The second book I read was Persepolis by Marjane Satrapi. This is a graphic novel, and it was fantastic. I love a coming of age story set in a political upheaval time, because I think it can be really chunky or dense to read political history dry as nonfiction. To see the changes in a country or a regime through the eyes of a kid whose life is getting changed every time something happens is really readable, and it also gives you a really clear insight into the human element of history. One of the ones that was striking to me about this is this moment when she's in school as a kid, and they went from, okay, it's right at the beginning actually. They went from not having to wear veils to having to wear veils because of a change in the power structure. And so there's this graphic of like the kids running around, throwing the veils around and using them for hopscotch and jump rope and playing games and stuff. And the illustrations were incredible, and the stories were so human and charming and sweet. It's set in Iran during the Islamic Revolution. I don't think I retained the a timeline of the history that happened in this book, but I'm not sure that a retention is, this is kind of getting onto like a bigger thing, but there's this weird idea that like you're supposed to remember what you read. Like you read to learn, and then what it means to have learned something is to like be able to recall it and verbalize it at a moment's notice, and I just don't think either of those premises are necessarily like true. I don't think you have to remember what you read. I don't think that's realistic at all. And I also don't think the point of learning is to be able to like regurgitate facts. So I could talk about that for a while probably, but I would totally recommend Persepolis. And it does have a little bit of a, not really a cliffhanger ending, but there is a second one in the series. The whole thing is black and white. I wish like anyway, I wish you could just get it, and guess what? You have a library, so you can. So check that one out. It was great. I feel like when I watch this, it's just like my eyes are gonna be sleepy, but what I'm saying is gonna exist. So, hopefully you're sleepy when you're watching this too. The next book I read is Sad Animal Facts. This one sits, you can't quite see it in the shop, but kind of with some coffee table-y decorative type books that I have, and I've had it for years. And then one day I was sitting here, as I do, staring at my shelf as I do, and I picked it up and then I read it start to finish. If you haven't seen this book before, this is what every page looks like. It's a doodle of an animal, a fact about them, and then a tiny bit of just a pithy little joke that the animal is saying. It is truly all sad animal facts. So the average goldcrest lives 8 months, and then a little doodle of goldcrest, and it says, "I'll never have a birthday." Guinea pigs sleep with their eyes open. That way I can't see my nightmares. Domesticated rabbits live 8 years as pets or 24 hours on their own. Okay, so I'm not great at taking care of myself. The whole book is like that. It's so fun. And then at the end, because the person who wrote this, Brooke Barker, really does love animals and nature, there are basically footnotes or like an appendix with info about every single doodle that you just read about and the actual animal factor, however it plays into their ecosystem and life. And it's cute. It's a fun, funny gift. And it's probably one of those things where like, you know who you should give this to, or you should just get a couple of copies, and then whenever you need like a gift when you're going somewhere, this would be a unique and hilarious one. Oh no. Oh no. Okay. Well, sometimes when a book gets damaged at the shop or there's just inventory, so whatever happening, there's a pile that we're getting rid of, and I grabbed this one out of the pile, and I regret that. Sort of. I'm kidding about the sort of. I actually do not recommend this book. And oh my gosh, wait, you can already see. It was so silly that I got my little these thingies and I started putting them in because I was like, I have to remember this ridiculousness. When I finish this book, we'll get to the stickies in a second, but the word that was like neon billboard in my head was nothing burger, which is not a word I like or use at all. But I think it was invented for this situation, which is someone executing the assignment perfectly, but with no style and no glitter. Like no, it was just like, it was like watching someone just like take a like stack of white paper and then kind of scoot it together like this on the table and then like set it down. Like sure, it's like nice that it's like flat on the edges and stuff, but that wasn't like satisfying in the way that like videos of people doing actually organizing things are. Or have you seen the video of like candy companies where it's all of the different candies color, like they're printed, like the red M&Ms are printed in green, and then it's like the scene where they're all like going together. I guess it's not a scene because it actually happens, but they all get dumped into this thing and mixed up. And it's so cool to watch. This was not cool to watch. So this is a romance set in, I can't even Look at the cover with a straight face. In Wyoming at a ranch. And it was every trope just like so averagely executed. And let's see, let's get some specifics for you, even though I don't think you're gonna have any trouble winning it. Also, I will say the writing was competent. Like, I'm not trying to diss this book, especially with some of the books we have coming later. This one is so fine. It's so fine. But that's not what we're looking for. I feel like on those, like, World of Dance was one of my favorite, any dance show I love, but I love World of Dance and So You Can Get Dance. And Neo was a judge on World of Dance. He'd always say, this is for $1 million. And that's how I feel like we're playing for $1 million here. This is not getting past like auditions. Oh. Okay. Sorry. I have to go in order because I've just sat here rolling my eyes for the last couple of minutes. So, this first one, the male main character is a bar owner in a small town, and he was always irresponsible and he couldn't keep everything together. And then finally he's like gotten his life together recently. Emmy is the female main character, and she's a famous barrel racer. Like, she's a highly competitive professional barrel racer, but she just like dropped out of the circuit for the season and came home like in distress and shame, basically. And that's they reconnect. So she goes to his bar and she's with her friend, and then someone is talking to her who's not the guy who really likes her, and he comes up because he's like, why are you talking to her? And then okay. So then he being this guy, like, totally clocks, as in, how do you say? Well, is clock a word for hitting someone? Megan, can you hear me? Okay, I'm just gonna read this, I think. So we have the bar, we have the guy who's been talking to Emmy, and then he like puts his hand on like her shoulder or something, and then this guy comes over and hits him and throws him out of the bar, and everyone cheers apparently. And then she says, what the hell's wrong with you? You can't just go around hitting people when they talk to me. And then he says, he put his hands on you, sugar. No one puts their hands on you. And then she goes, someone wrote this. This is the real world, Brooks, not a romance novel. I don't need you to rescue me from a creep in a bar. I can handle myself. And the sort of like protective, I don't know if it's a trope to like, but I think it is, because I feel like it's happened in many books. So we'll call it the like wreaking vengeance on other men. Male main character wreaking vengeance on other men for like being disrespectful in the vicinity of the woman that he's attached to. And there are times where, first of all, it like doesn't taste like a trope. Evie Dunmore, I think, has one that's fine. This one, she's literally referencing, like meta-referencing romance novels, which you can't do, especially if you aren't like talented enough to pull it off. And so that's one of my problems with it. And then I think my other problem with it is like, it's this sort of like selective desire for safety, and it really is not difficult to care that the people who you A, are in love with, and B, can see with your eyes are safe. Like, that is so natural and easy. And I don't think it's like hot and impressive to be A, territorial, but B, like have such a low level of care for the safety of someone who is only barely vulnerable in this situation. Because there are many people who are actually vulnerable, and there are ways that violence is affected on people that is usually not so easily observed, and it's not special to care about one person in one situation when it's just put on a plate for you. I think it is a much more worthy and compelling character trait to have a male main character who actually researches what gendered violence looks like and cares about it on like a global or just like a zoomed out level. And I think to, as a writer, kind of weaponize this idea that women are not safe. Weaponize isn't the word, but like to use this as a moment for this like testosterone fueled revenge throw out of the bar is just like, that's just not, it's just not cute. It's just not compelling enough. And also, it's just, yeah, it's just not impressive or compelling to me to care about the safety of the people that you already care about. And I think that it is impressive and compelling to care about more things. And I would earlier tends to be like, it's not impressive to care about the people that you care about in the situations where you can insert yourself and maybe not like listen to them or trust them as the expert on what they need. Like, this is not about her safety. This whole scene is not. And anyway, that's a trope that really, like, I get why it's used, but it really doesn't work for me a lot of the time. And I also think, like, for me, there's this, like, men are more entitled to violence in interpersonal reaction, like, situations. So, like, when he hits the guy and throws him out, you're, like, not that surprised. And is it not that same entitlement to violence? Like, that is the problem. And it's not exactly the same, because you can choose to, like, be self-controlled and not hit someone. Like, men getting to hit things is not new or, like, great. And anyway, I was about to put that away because I just talked about that for so long. And I feel like I what do you call it when you talk for too long? But also I had to figure out what I was thinking by talking, so hope you made it through that. In the end, two more. At the end, she has one barrel race. She's gonna retire, she's gonna finish her career in her hometown, and then she takes off and goes left on the horse. And apparently, usually she goes right. Why the hell did she go left? All of us must have thought the same thing, because the male main character, heard her brother say the question out loud. That's a dumb way to write that. But also, I don't really think if you are like the elite of the elite in your sport, and your sport is doing 4 turns around barrels, and it takes like 12 seconds, that you could like so completely change such a crucial part of your routine and actually become faster. Like, you would have thought of that a long time ago if that was gonna work. So that was very silly. Yeah, silly. Enough, done. This began a long, bad stretch of pretty ridiculous romance novels that came into my hands one way or another. And don't worry, we don't have another one for 3 more books. So take a deep breath. We're super switching gears here. Actually, I think I finished these on the same day. So we're gonna go Practical Magic next, because I don't think I can go. No, it's on next. The next book I read is Practical Magic by Alice Hoffman. Alexis told me to read this one kind of a while ago, and I finally got around to it. Interestingly, this is one of the few books where people like the movie better than the book, almost across the board. I really liked the book. I haven't finished the movie, but it was fine. But I thought the story of the book, they had to shrink it to fit it in the movie, and I liked the parts they cut, basically. So interestingly, this book is so similar to this book. I know I talked about this earlier, and I know I roasted the cover. This one came out after this one. They are so similar. I know that I don't think maybe things being completely original is realistic. And I also think there's a reason people retell Shakespeare over and over or whatever, because anyway, these books specifically, I'm really curious. I would be really curious to know like the parallel evolution, or basically I want to know whether this author ever came in contact with anything about this. And I understand that that's not something I'm gonna get. And I also think that's fine. I have to put this down or I'm gonna confuse the two. This book is about two sisters, and then one of them has two daughters, and it's an intergenerational story. There's a little bit of magic. There's an old house. The two older, like these sisters, it starts from when they're kids, but their parents die, so they have to move in with their aunts, and they're kind of wacky older aunts. And it was really charming, and there were some just really like wry observations, really funny kind of like roasts. Obviously I love a sister book. There were some lines that were so like accurate, and it made me laugh. Okay, this is an interesting connection with what we were just talking about with like how characters interact with violence between them. There's a really striking 8 or 10 pages in this one where the younger daughters are 16 and 18 probably, or maybe 14 and 18, and one of them is about to, like, she's walking and she's alone on this stretch of road, and then there's these men who are approaching her, and it's like dangerous and uncomfortable, so she runs and runs and runs, and you don't know if she's gonna get away, and she gets to this little like strip mall, and her sister works at this ice cream store, and she like bursts in the door, and she's like muddy because it was with where they had to run and everything, and her, like, there's this line that's like her sister like takes one look at her just like folded over trying to catch her breath, panicked, like covered in grass, and like knows exactly what happened, and what they do, how she kind of helps her through what is a like terrifying experience. And I think that was a strength of this book, is how it wrote women surviving violence, and also how it wrote sisters, which I already said, but I thought this was great. I loved the little bits of magic. They all have a little bit of like magical ability, and I loved the home and the sisters and the relationships, and it was great. The next book I read is Notes on an Execution by Danieka Kafka, and it was fantastic. Teddy told me to read this one, and also Newly Nova, whose name is Lexi, she's a book YouTuber, had read it and loved it. She did a video that was like, this video ends when I find a 5-star book, and this was the one that was 5 stars for her. It is the story of a man who is on death row, and he's about to be executed that night. So all 12 of his chapters, or ish, are like hour 12, like 12 hours until he's killed, and then 11, 10, 9. In between the chapters, from his perspective, is the story of his life told by the different women that he comes in contact with or knows. So the opening chapter is his mother and the story of his mom. Having him, she lived on this remote farm with his father, and his father was violent, and so she had to figure out how to get him away, and then she put him up for adoption. Then you meet, when he's a little older, a girl who's at the foster home with him, and she ends up coming back into the story, and then he has a girlfriend in college, her twin sisters, one of the narrators, and all of the pieces worked so well together, and all of the everything was there for a reason, and it was saying something about how we construct our lives and how we care, or the things that can happen that make us think certain ways. And I thought it did just really, really great job. I really rarely like anything that has even like a smacking of true crime. Mysteries, thrillers, and true crime like make crime into entertainment, and I don't find it entertaining. And I think I could, I just like don't believe that that's sort of the way to go. So for me, so to read something about a serial killer, which like we know that serial killers are kind of this like sexy, like interesting, there's just a lot of like books and movies and stuff about serial killers, and like for me to really think that something like that worked, it was a lot of fun. And still it's fiction, it read like fiction, like it was a quick read and really beautifully written, and also not overwritten. I think maybe the other end of the spectrum from crime as entertainment would be crime as like just overwrought, like over philosophizing about, you know, what your characters are doing and what's going on. And this book also avoided that. It was very grounded in the story that it was telling, and it kept its feet in the dirt. And it was so, I thought it was so fantastic. I did a long review in the back. Tell me how Kafka wrote this book without it being gimmicky. Tell me how. Incredible. I think it can be really hard to have multiple points of view in a novel and make them all earn their spot there, and not just be different ways to dump the different pieces of information onto your reader, because how would this person know this? So I'll just like jump over and talk from this person's perspective for a while. There's a book next month that did that. That drove me crazy. But this one, every chapter by the different women absolutely needed to be there and was doing exactly what it's supposed to be doing. And I said, such restraint, such finesse. Ansel, I don't know how to say that name, that's the male killer, has chapters in between, and they don't make him seem extraordinary or exotic. He's a man like any other, which is true to life and so unusual in media. And then she's so restrained with the timeline that between his chapters, like I said, are the women's chapters. The timeline jumps between like the two almost consecutive chapters from the women. It'll be like a decade in between. And I almost thought that we were bouncing around chronologically, not that it was both timelines moving chronologically straight forward the whole time. I didn't figure that out until after I went back and read it, but I was never confused. And it was a really striking way when you're trying to look at someone and say, why did he kill people? And you're looking inside his head to also tell about the different things that happened to him that really sort of like tightened the screw in certain places. There's a lot of humanity in this book, and when I say that, like, I don't really know what it means sometimes, but also it's kind of more just like the characters felt real, I think is one way to say it. And then they also were built on this deeper foundation of like, they're telling you something about the world and the way the world is and the way that we are in it. And this is interesting in how it connects a little bit to what I was saying about Done and Dusted. So Hazel is one of the women. It's his girlfriend's twin. There are millions of men out there who want to hurt women. People seem to think that Ansel Parker is extraordinary because he actually did. Like, this is interesting. Less interesting. The next book I read is Cross the Line by Simone Sultani. And this is a book that Lo mentioned to me but had not read. And the main character in it has hypermobility, which is like a joint thing that I also have. So I was like, she was reading a different one by the author. She was like, it's kind of going well. So I got this one. And I don't love sports romance, which I have learned in the last like month or two. And maybe there are ones there that work, but we'll get more into that one. That was not my main issue. What this was a 3-star book out of 5. So solidly 3-star, and some of the features of it were 5-star. Like, sometimes you have a 3-star book and it's like, this is mid. The whole thing is so mid. Sometimes you have a 3-star book with some 1-star qualities and then some 5-star qualities. And it's so frustrating because you're like, you could have done this. You could have, you know, made this amazing. So in Cross the Line, you have the female main character, and she wants to work in professional sports, but she's been applying and not getting jobs. And then it turns out her brother's best friend is Dev, and he is a Formula One driver. And I don't know a lot about Formula One, but I've seen the movie Cars a couple of times, so I think, you know, it that's probably so silly. After reading this book, I really also still don't know that much more about Formula One, because she wasn't very good at like making you feel like you were the places where they are. So with F1, you travel to different cities for different races, and I never really felt like I was in Monaco or France or wherever in the world that they were, because they end up traveling together. He hires her to be his social media manager. And the strong part of this book was the characters. They were so just like, you liked them, you wanted to cheer for them, they were really well drawn. And then she took this like these two hugely promising people, and then just like, if you're supposed to have like an arc in a book, she just like crushed it with her car. Like, the arc was not there. Like on page 10, they're like, we can't date because like we're working together. And then on page like 200, they're like, we can't date because we're working together. And like, you have to have shape, you have to have your character transformation, and that just was like so fuss inducing. She also, like, they had one moment at a bar like 3 years before this book takes place, and she only tells you about that like in little bits throughout this book, which was just kind of unnecessarily like, I think that's how she thought she had an arc. But to drip like history onto the reader in a certain order is actually not the same thing as your characters changing and understanding the story differently, or whatever they might need to do to grow in their own individual ways and then come together. So that was a bummer. The strongest parts were in San Diego. So like I said, her brother is his best friend. Their families were neighbors in San Diego growing up. And there's a couple times where they go back there for holidays and then for his sister's wedding. And that was where everything was the strongest. And I think the author really could visualize this setup she'd given them and the families and the way that their lives bumped up against each other there, in a way that maybe she just couldn't imagine, like being in the sidelines, the pin. I don't know what the little area by the race cars is called, or like in a way that she isn't able to situate you in these big cities, like you would want. This is the other thing. So I told you they don't, that it was like a plateau. It was like a flat, like, we want each other, we can't have each other. Also though, yearning is like the trope for that. Yearning can work, but you didn't feel it. The author just like stated it over and over. So the character would just be like, I really want her. And then like that every 4 pages, which is just like not interesting to read. Like action is better to convince the reader of something like that. I did start skimming, maybe like 150 pages in. The other thing about this book that was great was the hypermobility representation. So it talks about, I mean, there's a couple of different things, but one of the ones I remember the most is like when she's packing to travel, which she travels all the time in the book, she has like all of her meds she has to take and like all of her like resistance bands and like all of these different things that when you're chronically ill, you have to like take with you everywhere you go, or else like you're gonna get a migraine and not be able to take care of it, or you're gonna you have to do like your little PT things, or else, you know, traveling, which already messes up all of the things that you have to keep yourself stable and healthy, is like only gonna make it that much worse. So the rep on that was great. I think the author has EDS. I don't think that she said that Willow, the main character, has it, but the hypermobility was kind of the main focus. Guys, this is fun. Books for friends. That's what I've started saying. Just hanging out with you guys. Okay, I was talking about books that come to me from the shop without me purchasing them. This incredibly nice copy of Beach Read, which actually, this is so beautiful. And then Sprayed Edges by Emily Henry came to me in the same way. And I don't remember, usually I read maybe a romance like every 2 months. Maybe I was so fussy about these 2 romances that I thought maybe Emily, I don't really remember. So this one was almost painful at the beginning, and then I got into it. And that is really interesting to me. It's hard to do. I feel like I'm supposed to like Emily Henry, and I don't dislike her, but I'm not like there counting down to all of her books. I haven't read them all, blah, blah, blah. And still, I'm really interested in her as like a cultural force. So if you aren't familiar with kind of the vibe of this part of the book industry, we'll talk more about how romances work in a video in a couple months, because I just read one with an old school cover. And actually the first time that I even considered reading a romance was because of a podcast. So this book is a gorgeous, sadly very recently out of print coffee table book by 99% Invisible, and that's a podcast I love. They did an episode on The Clinch, which is the name for like the old school romance cover with like the Fabio and then like the dress, or the woman in like the dress that's flowing and all of this. So the podcast was so interesting, and one thing it said is people who read romances read more than people who read basically any other genre, and that was super interesting to me. I love that I was like, we'll talk about this later. No. The first romance that I read, this is about to be a lie, was this book. Because I had listened to this podcast about like what to look for on the cover, and interestingly, like if you show a romance to someone who reads a lot of them, they can look at the cover and tell you like the setup, the tropes, the setting. Really interesting. Like I'll show you. So this one, you can tell it's sports, obviously, because it's a sports thing. And then you can tell it's social media because of like the phone. He's like handing her the phone. And then, I don't know, you could probably like keep splitting that out and you would find more clues. But I didn't do it right, because I looked at this and I thought, oh my gosh, I love that cover, and it has a dress on it. This must be a romance. It literally says gothic, like, so it was not. I got it at a Barnes & Noble in Orlando, and this book is so good. I thought it was great. Interestingly, it's, speaking of books that are really similar, it's really similar to A Study in Drowning by Ava Reed, which is trash. Like, I really thought that book was so bad. And the plot is exactly the same as this one. And that's, again, like, a gothic novel has certain themes and settings that you're going to use over and over. Don't read Study in Drowning, though. Read Mexican Gothic. So, Emily Henry, we're getting back, zooming in to romance. She's pulled a lot of people who read only lit fic or general fiction into the romance fold. So she's sort of a lot of people's entry person into the genre. And I would say there's a decent number of people who only read Emily Henry and they don't read any other romances. She comes out with one book a year, always in April, pretty consistently, and it is a huge seller, always. And so she's so popular that they have been doing re-releases of her books in hardcover, so a collector's edition, and those also sell like crazy, as you can see from this one. And this one, these are paperback, and they came out in paperback. Almost every book, when it comes out, is released in hardcover, and it sells in hardcover for about a year or longer if it's still selling, and then it'll come out in paperback after the sales slow down. So what I think is really interesting about that is you can tell when you look at someone's shelf when they got the book, because, for example, Craft, I bought in 4 years after it came out, and you can tell that because it's in paperback. Very few stores, unless they have really low turnover, will have a book still in hardcover that's now out in paperback. Whereas like this one, you can tell I got The Killing Fields of East New York right when it came out because it's in hardcover. So, one of the families I babysit for has Invisible Women in hardcover, and I was like, oh my goodness. I didn't get that one until it had been out for a while, but I don't think that necessarily matters. Like, who cares? What I'm saying is, like, it's not like a way of reason to like be judgy. I think it's really interesting though. But also because some bookstores send back their hardcover books to get the paperback when the paperback comes out. The hardcover books do still exist. Like, it's not like all of them sold all the way out and they are now all in homes and libraries across America. So for example, I had Under the Skin on my list for a long time, and it came out in paperback, but the paperback is a different cover and I wanted this cover. So I ordered it, and the shop just like puts in an order for the hardcover and it comes in. So hardcovers are more expensive, and then most people prefer paperbacks almost just across the board, I would say. One thing some people do that is so funny to me with the hardcover is they take off the dust jacket, and I just don't get that. Like, I think that, you know, getting a little wear and tear is part of having a book, but also a dust jacket without a book in it looks so vulnerable. And like, where are you putting that? Like, are you just gonna like, it's like someone's gonna set something on it and then it's gonna get like creases. Anyway. The last thing I was gonna say is, oftentimes a book will keep the same cover design from hardcover to paperback, but if it didn't sell very well, sometimes they will redesign it for the paperback version to come out. So I don't know, if that's what happened with Under the Skin, but most of these kept the same cover. Oh, I have one over here. This one I haven't read yet, Dead Weight. The original cover was like red and black and really intense looking, and this is the paperback. It's like a gentler color scheme and sparer lines and design. We'll see if that helps it sell more. And then Monsters is another one. The hardcover of this had a picture of Pablo Picasso on it where he's like in the water, like in the ocean. He has like a fake bull head on or something. I don't know if that's a famous photo. I had never seen it. But he is like sort of the archetypal problematic artist, which I'm sure is why they picked it for the cover. It was like a plain white cover with that, and then it said Monsters. This is such a shift also. It's like two women you can't see, but they're watching a movie, I think, and sharing a bag of popcorn. So, super different cover here. All that to say, one of the only genres where books come out the very first time in paperback is romance. So these are books that didn't come out in hardcover. Emily Henry is one of the only authors who can have her books come out in hardcover and people will pay for them. And then a year later they come out in paperback, and then apparently a couple of years later they come out in a special collector's edition release. So this is Beach Read by Emily Henry. It's one of her classics. One thing I would like to point out that is kind of crazy and fun is it's a beach in Michigan, somewhere at the Great Lakes. It's not a coastal beach. So this book was obnoxious in the beginning because the characters are writers. Now, I always think it's obnoxious when your characters are writers, or they work in publishing, or they have any book-related job. Now, I sort of overlook it with Emily Henry because she has just like put all of the asphalt over the grass, paved her way. This is always what she does every time the characters have something to do with books. So she has picked her lane, and I have to respect that she's doing, what's the, when you're critiquing a book, don't criticize what it wasn't trying to do. So I give her a little bit of grace there. I mean, I don't have to pick them up, would be the other half of that, but sometimes they fall into your lap. Extra obnoxiously, these are writers. Some of her characters like children's librarians. That's a little different. One of them is a doctor, but I can't talk about that because the ending of that one is so. She's a doctor. Actually, I shouldn't. She's a doctor, and then she realizes that being a surgeon doesn't make her happy, and so when she moves to Montana, she goes into pottery. Do you know how badly we need doctors in rural America? You don't have to be a surgeon. You can just be a little pediatrician or any not Meredith Grey intensity level doctor. But she had student debt, and she decided to quit being a doctor completely and do pottery. I just couldn't. That was not, even Emily Henry should not have done that. Two writers in a small beach town. They knew each other in college, and they end up in houses next to each other, and they're both dealing with writer's block. Okay, so I was in my first college workshop for writing. I was a creative writing major, and it was a fiction, so there are different ways to write. The 3 workshops that we had at Sanford were fiction, poetry, and nonfiction, which was new my senior year, and I got to take it. It was the best thing ever. I prefer to write nonfiction, and I was a sophomore, junior in this fiction workshop, got my first assignment, opened a Word document, and just like looked at the cursor blinking back at me. Like I'm supposed to put something on this blank page that just doesn't exist yet in the world. Writing fiction is not appealing to me, and also is really, really hard. And so I don't think I have it in the other room, but we're taking a roundabout storytelling on this. I wrote about a girl who couldn't figure out what to write, and my professor, so when you get workshops, it's the same as when you have like crit, which is like critique, like when you're an artist in an art classroom or whatever. You sit at the front, everyone has read your piece before they arrive, and then you cannot speak the whole time they're critiquing it. And first you talk about what works, and then you talk about what didn't. And the first thing my professor said was, nothing is less interesting than reading about writing. And reading about whether you're gonna write and whether you're not. And if you're a writer, then write and something. And I was like, oh shoot. And then he was like, but this wasn't actually about writing. This was about a girl who's trying to figure out what matters and what to do with her life. And I was like, yeah. I was very grateful that he had like saved. But it's the first part that stuck in my head, and he's right. Like he is absolutely right. Writing itself is not interesting. It's difficult and it takes focus, but it's not a dynamic activity except in the dynamism you create on the page. And so I really get annoyed with books about writing, fiction specifically. I just will not read it, honestly. It's like World War II books and books about writers that I just almost never get into. to open this book with two writers who are dealing with writer's block, I mean, that was just everything I did not want. She very quickly gives you some action, and they develop like a pact where she's like, okay, you have to write a happy book, which is what I usually write, and I have to write a sad lit boy book, which is what you usually write, and we'll see if we can get them published, actually, is what the deal is. And so then they create this training regimen, basically. So like, she's like, okay, I'll take you on like a cutesy rom-com type date because you're gonna write a rom-com. And he's like, I'll take you to interview this person from this really intense story I was just working on because that's like more intense. I don't know. And the times they have are fun, and the story like became engrossing enough that I was into it. I didn't love it. I'm not now an Emily Henry fan because of this. I think there are some things she does really well, and then there's some things that are always like her sort of classic things. Like I told you, there's always a writer. There's always really like unique names. In this one, the girl's name is January, and then the boy's name is Gus, but his name is Augustus Everett. And then there's also always gonna be like every 60 pages, like one instance of her trying to move her character through space and just accidentally like leaving an arm behind. Like something where you're like, that's not how matter works, to quote Teddy. We say that a lot. That's not how matter works. And like there was this one where they go down into the basement. She's down in the basement looking for something, and then he comes out to find her, and it's like she's trying to find a light bulb, I think. And she's like, everything is coated in dust. Like everything is so dusty. I haven't even been down here since I came to this house. And then he comes and they start flirting, and he like sets her on the deep freezer. And I'm like, no, everything is dusty. And after something's dusty long enough, like it's sticky. It's not just like soft. There's no way that you would sit on a deep freeze because you would be like filthy. And like, you could say that I just care about cleanliness, which I would argue that level of gross is kind of universal. But what is the bigger issue is that you have built this scene in the head of your reader, and then you have violated the integrity of it by pretending that someone like cleaned off the top of this deep freeze because you think that like this is where they need to have this connecting moment. And that's not, you gotta get them back upstairs, or you gotta clean the deep freeze or something. That's just not gonna make any sense. Anyway, there's also a third act breakup, which is what it's called when your characters who are very clearly ending up together break up right before the end of your book and then get back together, that I did not buy. And I was kind of having enough fun that I kind of forgave it, but also it wasn't. It didn't click. It didn't work. The next book I read is Chains by Laurie Haltz Anderson. This one is a young adult novel set during the Revolutionary War, and it follows a young girl named Isabel who is enslaved. She's actually free in Maryland when the book opens, and then her mother has died. She has a little sister, and the woman who owned her was going to free her upon her death, and then the person who comes to execute the will doesn't care, basically. And so she gets sold and sent to New York City. And one of the things that goes with what we were saying about historical fiction, I think most of the times when you read about slavery, you read about, or at least most of the fiction I've read about slavery is set during the Civil War. And slavery was around for a really long time before that. And so it was interesting to read about what it looked like, 60, 70 years before it ended up being abolished. And also it was interesting to read about slavery in the North, right? It's interesting to read about New York City before it was what it is today. And from, Age of Innocence is like New York City when living up by Central Park was like living like 100 years away. And then City of Girls is one that's like you show up to New York City in maybe the 20s or 30s, and so it's still so different than what it's like now. And that one you really get to see the city change because you follow this woman through her life. I mean, decades of her life. Just a good, fun novel. So New York City from maybe 1920 to 1970, which obviously there's a lot of changes there. This one is part of a series, and it has a cliffhanger ending, and I did know it's part of a series, so I should be okay with that. I don't think I'll read the next one. I thought it was really competently written and really well researched. Obviously like super dark, super hard subject matter. The next book I read is The Moon Without Stars by Chanel Miller. This is an ARC, which we've talked about before. It's the book before it comes out. And I have both of Chanel's other books. One of them is in the Hall of Fame. Should be in everyone's Hall of Fame and library. You know my name. One of the best books out there. And then this was her second book, Magnolia Wu Unfolds It All, which this is nonfiction. This is elementary grade, and this is middle grade, I would say. So this one you can see the words are really big. Chanel is an illustrator as well, so she has her illustrations in the book and then also did the cover, which I love this cover. This is her third book. It has fewer illustrations. You can see the font is bigger than in this one, and it is a coming of age book, and so the kids are older than this one. This is set in a town where the kids, present day, the kids can walk around, so they can walk to school and home and whatever, and in it the main character is dealing with kind of trying out new friend groups in middle school. She has her best friend that she's always been friends with, and how their relationship has to kind of flex and change over the course of 7th grade. And she has a chance to kind of become friends with the cooler girls, how that goes, what it's like when she gets her first period, navigating different ways to be friendly to people who are struggling or to be critical. And I mean, I would guess it's going to get compared a lot to Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret. Really similar timeline, and I would say, I don't like the word unflinching, but an unflinching look at middle school. And it was not as strong as, I mean, this one is just so different, but it wasn't as strong as Magnolia Wu. To me, there were some parts that really worked, and I thought the characters worked, and I felt pretty comfortable in the setting, but the way that time moved was a little off. The pacing was kind of weird. It covers the course of a school year, but I didn't really figure that out until the end, and I think it should be more clear what holidays and seasons are happening so that you can feel the way the book moves. It wrapped up a little too fast. I didn't get as much closure as I wanted and quite as much finishing of the character transformation, and so it wasn't a 5-star for me. I have one book that I had talked about and then the phone died, so I lost my footage, but lucky you, this is the first of a series. If pink flags symbolize and mark parts that are super goofy and need help, just know that you should be so excited to get to hear about this book. It is one where I read and finished this book in September, but Lo said the second book got better, so I then read the next one, even though this one really did not work for me. I have made the executive decision to wait to talk about this one until the next video, or potentially do a video just about this series and how very silly it is. So I I read Mile High. I actually didn't read the whole thing. I DNF'd it. And that was the last book I read or finished during September. So that's why the stacks moved around, because I had done that also while the phone was dead. But incredibly, it saved everything up until it died, even though I didn't know the phone died and I didn't hit stop recording. So that's incredible. There are some things about technology that are nice, and I will give that one feature 5 stars. So these were my 3 favorite books of this month. They are all 3 worth your time. This one, the pacing is kind of weird, but I really thought it worked. And if you've seen the movie, you really might not like it. The movie has Nicole Kidman and Sandra Bullock, which is kind of fun. This one is a graphic novel. The thing I love about graphic novels is they read fast, and you're supposed to kind of read them. They invite you to read them fast. And I always feel like poetry you can read fast, but like you really shouldn't. That's kind of like the opposite of the point. I'm not a fast reader generally, and so it's fun to read a book that moves you along quickly. And then this one is probably the top book, and it was special. And I don't like the cover because a locket is not that big. It looks disorientingly large, and it deserves better. Interesting final fact before we wrap up: this author knits while she writes. So she's like, when you're writing and then you have to stop and think for a second, and then she switches and she does mindless knitting while she's thinking until she can decide what she's going to type out, because that works for her. I looked up a podcast that she was featured on. That's one of the best ways to find out how to pronounce people's names, and learned that fact before I ended up clicking out of it. Okay, that's September. I'm gonna go to bed. Thanks for coming, and we will see each other for October and more really iffy romances, among other books. I really look, the pile is off screen. It's like a teaser. Other books I really was not getting down with. So rough couple of months, but also it's a really good month in there too. I don't know why I'm still trying to summarize. I'm just still talking. And it's time to go to